So there's this nursing home worker, right? Soft-spoken guy, always patient with the residents, never raised his voice in 8 years. Until this abusive son showed up and started getting violent with his elderly dad. And what happened next? Man, it showed everyone why some people choose jobs where they can still serve and protect, even without a uniform. So, Sunset Manor Nursing Home. This place housed 180 elderly residents, most of them in their 70s and 80s, many dealing with dementia, mobility issues, and the kind of health challenges that come with advanced age. It was a clean, well-run facility, with a staff that genuinely cared about their patients. But, like every nursing home, it dealt with the complex dynamics of families struggling with the emotional and financial burden of elder care. Tommy Rodriguez had been working the night shift at Sunset Manor for 8 years straight, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., Wednesday through Sunday. He was the kind of aide that residents asked for by name, the one who remembered that Mrs. Patterson liked her tea with honey, that Mr. Williams needed extra blankets because his circulation was poor, that Mrs. Chen got anxious during thunderstorms and needed someone to sit with her. Tommy was quiet in a way that felt safe, you know. When residents were confused or scared, which happened often with dementia patients, his presence was calming. He'd speak in low, steady tones, move slowly so he wouldn't startle anyone, and had this way of making even the most agitated patient feel secure. "Tommy's got a gift," head nurse Margaret Foster would tell new staff members. "Some people are just natural caregivers. He treats these folks like they're his own family." But what Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Tommy Rodriguez hadn't always been a gentle caregiver. 28 years earlier, he'd been Sergeant Major Thomas Rodriguez, United States Army, 1st Infantry Division. 25 years of active duty, including 4 combat deployments and 6 years as a drill instructor at Fort Benning. Tommy had trained thousands of young soldiers, turning scared 18-year-olds into disciplined warriors who could handle themselves in combat. He'd earned his combat infantry badge in Desert Storm, led men through firefights in Iraq and Afghanistan, and spent the final years of his career teaching others how to survive in the most dangerous places on Earth. But he'd also seen too much. Too many young soldiers who came home broken, too many families destroyed by war, too many people who needed protection but had no one to protect them. When Tommy retired from the Army at 43, he'd made a conscious choice about how to spend the rest of his life. He wanted to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He wanted to serve without violence, to use his strength to comfort rather than conquer.
Nursing home work had seemed perfect. Use his discipline and attention to detail to provide care, his leadership skills to mentor younger staff, his protective instincts to watch over vulnerable people. For 8 years, it had been exactly what his soul needed, until Tuesday night in November, when everything changed. It started, like most family conflicts at Sunset Manor, with frustration, guilt, and financial stress colliding in the hallway outside a patient's room. Frank Morrison, 83 years old, had been a resident for 6 months. Alzheimer's disease had stolen most of his memories, leaving him confused and sometimes combative. His son, Dale Morrison, visited twice a week, and those visits were becoming increasingly difficult for everyone involved. Dale was 48, unemployed for the past year and struggling to pay for his father's care. The monthly fees were draining Frank's savings, and Dale was facing the possibility of having to sell his father's house to cover expenses. But more than the money, Dale was dealing with the emotional devastation of watching his dad disappear piece by piece. On this particular Tuesday, Dale had arrived around 10:30 p.m., already agitated. He'd been drinking, not enough to be stumbling drunk, but enough to lower his inhibitions and amplify his anger. He found his father in the common room, staring blankly at a television he wasn't really watching. "Dad," Dale said, sitting down next to Frank. "Dad, it's Dale. Your son." Frank looked at him with the polite confusion of someone trying to place a familiar face. Do I know you?" The question hit Dale like a physical blow. 6 months ago, his father had been a retired construction foreman who could build anything with his hands, who remembered every detail of Dale's childhood, who called every Sunday just to check in. Now, he was this fragile, confused stranger. "Dad, come on." Dale's voice was strained. "I'm Dale, your son. I visit you twice a week. How can you not remember me?" Frank shook his head apologetically. "I'm sorry. I meet a lot of people here. Are you one of the nurses?" That's when Dale's grief transformed into rage. "Jesus Christ, Dad, I'm your son. I've been taking care of you, paying for this place, visiting you constantly, and you don't even know who I am?" Frank pulled back, frightened by the anger in Dale's voice. In his confused state, he saw a hostile stranger getting aggressive with him, and his fight-or-flight response kicked in. "I want to go to my room," Frank said, standing up unsteadily. "I don't like angry people." Dale grabbed his father's arm, harder than he intended. "You're not going anywhere until you acknowledge who I am. I'm your son, damn it!" Frank tried to pull away, but Dale's grip tightened. "Please let me go. You're hurting me." That's when Tommy appeared. He'd been making his rounds, checking on residents, when he heard raised voices from the common room. His training kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, identify the threat, determine the appropriate response. What he saw was a larger, younger man physically restraining an elderly patient who was clearly distressed. "Sir," Tommy said quietly, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "I need you to let go of Mr." Morrison Dale turned, his face flushed with alcohol and emotion. "This is my father, okay?" "This is a family matter. Mind your own business." Tommy had dealt with difficult family members before, but something about Dale's body language triggered deeper instincts. The way he was holding Frank's arm, the way his other hand was clenched in a fist, the way he was positioned between Frank and the exit, this wasn't just emotional distress. This was potential violence. "I understand you're frustrated," Tommy said, still using his calm caregiver voice, "but you're frightening your father, and I can't allow that." "You can't allow it?" Dale laughed harshly. "Who the hell are you to tell me what I can do with my own dad? I'm paying $2,400 a month for this place, and he doesn't even know who I am." Frank was whimpering now, trying to pull away from Dale's grip. "Please, someone help me. This man is hurting me." That's when something ancient and powerful stirred in Tommy Rodriguez. 28 years of military training don't just disappear because you trade fatigues for scrubs. When Tommy saw an elderly, vulnerable person being physically restrained and emotionally terrorized, every protective instinct he'd developed over 2.5 decades of service came flooding back. But this wasn't a combat zone. This was a nursing home. His job was to protect and comfort, not to dominate and destroy. So when Tommy moved, he moved with the controlled precision of someone who knew exactly how much force was necessary and how much was too much. "Sir," Tommy said, and his voice had changed, not louder, but carrying an unmistakable authority that made Dale look directly at him. "You have 3 seconds to release Mr. Morrison and step away from him." Dale was still holding his father's arm, still blocking his path to safety. "Or what? You'll call security? File a complaint? I'm his son. I have rights here." Tommy took 1 step closer, still not threatening, still professional. But something in his presence had shifted. Other residents in the common room seemed to sense it. The ones who were lucid enough looked toward Tommy with a combination of relief and recognition, like they could feel the protection he represented. 2 seconds, Tommy said quietly. Dale must have sensed the change too, because he released Frank's arm. But instead of stepping away, he moved closer to Tommy, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate. Dale tried to pull away, tried to swing with his free hand, but found himself unable to move effectively. Tommy's grip was like being held by a professional, not painful, not violent, but absolutely inescapable. "Let me go," Dale struggled. "You can't do this to me. I'll sue this place." "Sir," Tommy said, still in that same steady voice, "your father is scared and confused. Getting physical with him won't help him remember you, and it will traumatize him. Is that really how you want to spend your time with him?" Something in Tommy's tone, not condescending, not judgmental, just truthful, seemed to cut through Dale's anger. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. I just want him to remember me," Dale's voice cracked. "He's my dad. We used to fish together, work on cars together. He taught me everything I know about being a man. And now, he looks at me like I'm a stranger." Tommy held him for another moment, then slowly, carefully, released the control hold. Dale rubbed his wrist where Tommy had held it, but he didn't move aggressively. "I know," Tommy said quietly, "but right now, the best thing you can do for your father is be someone he feels safe around. Someone gentle and patient." That's when Frank, who had been watching from a safe distance, approached Tommy with the trust of someone who recognized protection when he saw it. "Thank you," Frank said to Tommy. "That man was scaring me." As Tommy helped Frank back to his room, his sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a tattoo on his forearm that Dale couldn't quite make out in the dim hallway lighting. But Margaret Foster, the head nurse who had arrived during the commotion, saw it clearly. It was military ink, detailed, professional. So matter, Frank was settled in his room, and Dale had left the facility with promises to think about anger management counseling. Margaret found herself in the staff break room with Tommy. She'd worked with him for 8 years, but tonight she'd seen something that didn't match the gentle caregiver she thought she knew. "Tommy," she said carefully, "what you did out there, that wasn't something you learned in nursing aide training." Tommy was filling out an incident report, writing in the precise block letters of someone who'd filled out a lot of official forms. "Dale was getting physical with his father. I intervened to protect Mr. Morrison. That's my job." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Margaret sat down across from him. "The way you moved, the way you controlled the situation, that was professional. Military professional." Tommy set down his pen and looked at her. Those steady eyes that residents found so comforting weren't just calm. They were evaluating, calculating, assessing. Even here, in a nursing home break room, part of him was still scanning for threats and planning responses. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Down the hall, a resident was calling for help with something. Probably Mrs. Patterson needing assistance getting to the bathroom. In a few minutes, he'd go help her, speaking in the same gentle tones he'd used for 8 years, moving with the same patient care he showed every night. "I trained soldiers," Tommy said finally, "taught them how to protect themselves and others, how to stay calm under pressure, how to use the minimum force necessary to neutralize threats. Drill instructor, among other things." Margaret wanted to ask more questions, but something in Tommy's expression warned her that this door didn't open easily, not because he was hiding something shameful, but because some experiences were too heavy to share with people who hadn't carried similar weights. But she wasn't the only one asking questions. Word spread through Sunset Manor the way all significant news spreads through small communities, in whispers, fragments, and gradual realizations. The night shift staff began paying attention to details they'd never noticed before. The way Tommy moved through the facility with that careful awareness of exits and potential hazards. The way he positioned himself during difficult situations to protect residents while maintaining tactical options. The way he could calm even the most agitated dementia patient with just his presence. Dr. Sarah Kim, The facility's medical director had served as a Navy corpsman before medical school. She recognized the signs of someone who'd been trained for serious situations and had experienced them firsthand. "Margaret," she said during a staff meeting, "I think we need to know more about Tommy's background. Not to cause problems, but to understand what kind of resource we have here." Resource? Someone with that level of training doesn't end up working night shifts at a nursing home by accident. There's a story there, and I'm betting it explains why he's so good at this job. The story, when Tommy finally shared pieces of it, was both simpler and more complex than anyone had imagined. Sergeant Major Thomas Rodriguez had spent his final years in the Army training young soldiers at Fort Benning. Every cycle, he'd take groups of scared, undisciplined teenagers and turn them into disciplined warriors who could protect themselves and others in combat. But he'd also watched many of those same young people come home broken from deployments, struggling with PTSD, unable to readjust to civilian life. The breaking point had come during his last year of service when one of his former trainees, a kid named Miguel Santos, who Tommy had helped transform from a gang member into a model soldier, had committed suicide 6 months after returning from Afghanistan. Miguel had sought Tommy out during his final leave, asking for help dealing with nightmares and flashbacks. But the military mental health system had failed him. At Miguel's funeral, Tommy had made a decision. He was done training people for war. He wanted to spend the rest of his life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, using his strength and discipline to provide comfort rather than prepare for combat. Nursing home work hadn't been a step down from military service. It had been a purposeful choice to serve a different population with the same dedication and protective instincts. "These folks are vulnerable," Tommy explained to Dr. Kim during a private conversation. "They've lived full lives, contributed to society, raised families, served their communities. Now they need protection from confusion, from fear, from people who would take advantage of their weakness. That's a mission I can believe in." After the incident with Dale Morrison, Sunset Manor's administration faced a decision. They could treat Tommy's intervention as a liability issue. An employee using physical force on a visitor, even justified force, created potential legal problems. Or they could recognize what they actually had: a staff member whose unique background made him exceptionally qualified to handle the difficult situations that arose in elder care. They chose recognition. Within a month, Tommy had been promoted to night shift supervisor, with additional responsibilities for staff training and crisis intervention. He began teaching other aides how to de-escalate difficult family situations, how to recognize signs of potential elder abuse, and how to protect vulnerable residents without escalating conflicts. But Tommy's most important contribution wasn't administrative. It was the continued presence of someone who understood that protection and care weren't separate concepts, but two aspects of the same commitment to service. Frank Morrison continued to live at Sunset Manor, his memory continuing to fade as Alzheimer's progressed. Dale returned to visit, but now his interactions with his father were gentler, more patient. Whether it was the counseling he'd started attending, or simply the memory of how easily Tommy had controlled him, Dale began focusing on making his father comfortable rather than trying to force recognition. And late at night, when the facility was quiet and most residents were sleeping, Tommy would make his rounds with the same careful attention he'd maintained for 8 years. He'd check on Mrs. Patterson, who still liked her tea with honey. He'd adjust Mr. Williams' blankets because his circulation was poor. 2 years after the Dale Morrison incident, Sunset Manor had become known in the community as an exceptionally well-run facility, where families felt confident their elderly loved ones were truly protected and cared for. The waiting list for admission had grown, and staff turnover, always a problem in nursing home work, had dropped significantly as employees learned from Tommy's approach to patient care. Tommy had quietly trained a new generation of caregivers who understood that their job was about more than medical assistance and daily care. They learned to see their residents as whole people, deserving of dignity and protection, to recognize signs of abuse or neglect, and to intervene appropriately when family dynamics became unhealthy. But Tommy's greatest legacy wasn't professional. It was personal. Among the residents who were still lucid enough to understand, word had spread about the night supervisor who'd been a soldier, who'd chosen to spend his civilian life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Frank Morrison, despite his advancing dementia, seemed to feel safer when Tommy was on duty. Even though Frank rarely remembered names or faces anymore, some deeper part of his consciousness recognized Tommy as someone who could be trusted completely. Dale Morrison had transformed his relationship with his father, learning to approach their visits as opportunities to provide comfort rather than seek recognition. He'd started bringing photo albums, playing Frank's favorite music, and simply sitting quietly with him when words weren't necessary. "I don't know what you said to my son that night," Frank said to Tommy during one of his increasingly rare lucid moments, "but he's different now. Gentler. More like the boy I raised." Tommy smiled. "I just reminded him that sometimes the best way to show love is to make someone feel safe. So now I gotta ask you guys, have you ever met someone whose gentleness seemed to come from a place of great strength? Someone who chose to use their power to protect rather than dominate, to comfort rather than control? Drop a comment and tell us about the gentle warriors in your life, the people who could handle any crisis but choose to spend their strength on care and kindness. Because here on the Human Stories, we honor the protectors who never stopped serving, even when they traded their uniforms for different kinds of service. The guardians who understand that true strength isn't about winning fights. It's about making sure the fights never have to happen. Thanks for watching, guys. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to understand that heroism comes in many forms. Hit that subscribe button to help us celebrate the quiet courage of those who protect the vulnerable.